Hi, I'm Jessica.
And I'm Tracy.
And this is She's on Top, the place where we celebrate and elevate women.
And this is our second video in a 4-part series we're doing with Share Lawyers on insurance. Hi, Sam.
Hello.
Hi, Sam. We got the first video, we covered kind of all the different kinds of insurance, and we got a great response to that and a lot of questions. So we're excited about doing this one. And this one, we're going to talk about disability for individuals.
So Samantha, could you start with just telling us, what is disability cover?
So we're talking about disability for individuals, meaning people who are self-employed or professionals purchasing an individual disability policy for themselves, which is different than group disability, which we'll talk about in the next video. And individual disability is essentially a product you would purchase to protect you if you cannot work due to a medical condition that prevents you from working for some period of time, and that this product would pay you some sort of benefit when you cannot work.
And so does it pay, like, does it cover 100% of your salary, Sam, or just part of it? How does it work?
So it depends on the product that you purchase, and it's typically a percentage of your pre-disability income. I say commonly we see about 60 to 70%, but some products could be as high as 85 to 90% of your income. If it's an individual policy, you often have to show proof of the income that you have earned, and you have to continue to show that proof to the insurance company on an annual basis. So it fluctuates based on your business's or your personal income for the previous year. It's not just based on what you your income when you purchase the policy. If you start earning more income, the premiums would go up, but the benefit would also go up based on that.
That's good to know. Now, are there waiting periods? Like when you get sick, do you get the money right away? How does that work?
So typically, waiting periods vary. So the waiting period is a period of time from which you, let's say your date of disability is X, you then claim to the insurance company, and there's a waiting period of anywhere from 30 to 90 to 180 day waiting period before the benefits would kick in. And that would be an option when you're purchasing as well, as to what the waiting period would be. So you have to think about what you're doing during that waiting period, and if you have any access to any other income or income protection during that period. So if you're self-employed, are you paying into EI? Typically, when you are self-employed, you don't deduct, and you're not drawing a salary, you're not deducting EI, and then you would not be entitled to EI sickness benefits. If you are paying into EI, then you would be entitled to EI sickness benefits first, which covers you for 15 weeks, and that's through the government. So in that case, you would opt for a longer waiting period. 15 weeks is about 4.5 months, so you'd want to correlate those time frames. So that would be one question. If you're not entitled to EI sickness, then you don't have any income until you reach the waiting period. In that case, you would probably want to opt for a shorter waiting period, even 15 or 30 days if possible.
Now, Sam, what if, somebody, does it affect the price? Like, what if somebody said, I don't want to put out the money to get full coverage. Can they get partial coverage? Like maybe they have a partner and they're like, oh, he's got a salary or she's got a salary, so I actually just need partial cover of my salary. It doesn't not work like that. How does that work?
So, I mean, partial could mean two different things. One would be, partially covering the amount of income. And I would say that would be more addressed by the previous comment about percentage of income. So if you only want the policy to cover 50% of your income, you could purchase a policy like that. And the premiums would be less for sure. So that would be one way to look at partial. The other thing where partial would come in is, are you working part-time or partially while still being disabled from working full-time? And then that would extrapolate to you making less income. So a lot of policies have a partial disability provision, and that could kick in right away. Let's say you can't work full-time, or let's say you're off on disability and then you do a gradual return to work and you start being able to work more hours, arguably the insurance company should be paying you under the partial disability provision, which is essentially a top up. So let's say you're making $1,000 a month and your benefit is $3,000 a month. So they should be paying you the difference, the additional $2,000 a month under the partial disability provision. So certainly if you're looking at a product, you should look to see if that partial disability provision is there, because it could be quite valuable if you can only work part-time.
Yeah, that's actually great, because sometimes, you know, you get disabled, but or something happens, but you can work part-time, but you say you don't want to be denied total disability insurance. So I think that's actually something really important to think about. So another question I have for you is we talk a lot about, you know, when you like medical information, how much do you have to give? That's always something that I always think about. Do you have to tell them everything? Like, how important is that?
So, well, there's two different times when you would be looking to give medical information to the insurance company. The first is when you are purchasing the policy. And I would say that you want to tell them everything when you're purchasing the policy. You do not want to hide anything. Typically, when you purchase any type of insurance that's related to health, you have to disclose, or they ask you a series of medical questions. You know, what is your medical history? Have you ever had any of these conditions? Have you seen a doctor in the last 5 years? All of those types of questions. You want to be as truthful as possible, and try not to forget anything. And if you have had sought medical help in the recent past, you could even go so far as to send your medical records to the insurance company along with your application. The reason is because if they find out later when you make a claim that you didn't disclose certain medical conditions, they could use that against you, and say, well, you didn't tell us about this, so therefore you're not covered. You took medication for depression for many years ago, and now you're claiming for depression, so we're not going to cover you. Or it wouldn't even have to be the same type of condition that they're denying you on. It's just, well, you didn't tell us about it, so your policy's canceled.
Wow.
So you really, at that time, you really want to give them all of the information, because they can't really hold it against you if you tell them about it. Okay, if you don't tell them about it, then they could deny your claim on the basis of misrepresentation. So that's the first time. When you're making a claim, so you're sick and you can't work, you also want to tell them everything that's happening at that time, all the reasons why you can't work, but you want to focus on the main disabling conditions. Okay, so let's say you are a diabetic, and that's something that you've lived with for many years. That's not disabling you. You know, that might be part of your medical records, but that's not the reason you cannot work. So I wouldn't focus on that. You would focus on, well, now I have this new condition that's preventing me from working. And that's what your doctor would also focus on in the application for disability.
That's perfect. It actually leads into my next question, which is then, you know, you deal with denied claims. Why are claims get denied? Because I think we know in our first video, you said it's not, sometimes they're denied at the beginning and sometimes they allow it. And then all of a sudden in the middle of the, you know, a few months in or whatever, they're like, we're disallowing this now. So can you talk a little bit about that? How people can protect themselves?
So, I mean, we see claims that are denied for all different types of reasons, particularly in the individual policy realm. I'll talk about a few different reasons. The biggest one for all claims is that there's not enough medical support, or that they do not, the claimant does not meet the test for disability. That's what the insurance company would say. So maybe they have a medical condition, but the insurance company doesn't believe that that is disabling them. You know, we often see this in cases of invisible disabilities, so things like mental health or chronic pain, where it may not show up on a test, and the only support that the person has is their own word and what they've told their doctor, and that can often be a reason for denial or termination of claims. The other reasons that we see denials include, a pre-existing condition, that they're not complying with treatment or rehab. So, one of the obligations under most policies is that you are complying with the recommendations of your doctor, you're getting appropriate treatment for your condition, and they could use that against you. Let's say, it's recommended that you are seeking the advice of a mental health professional, like a psychiatrist or psychologist, and that's not available to you because of our health system, which is a thing, very common thing that we see, because psychiatrists, it's very difficult to get in to see a psychiatrist. There's long waiting lists, and psychologists, you have to pay to see a psychologist or a social worker, and sometimes people cannot afford to do that. So in that case, they haven't seen anybody aside from their family doctor. And the insurance company said, well, you're not getting appropriate treatment for your condition. We're going to deny you. That's not really the person's fault, but that is something we do see quite commonly, that type of an example. With respect to individual policies, one type of policy we see is this accident only policy. So it has to be an accident that happened. It's not just any type of medical condition that's preventing you from working. So that is a particular policy. It's cheaper to purchase an accident only policy than a general disability policy. The problem is that if it's not an accident or injury, then you wouldn't be covered. So that's another example. And then talking back to the misrepresentation that I was mentioning before about, misrepresenting your health history, another reason. So there's lots of other reasons, I can tell you that, but those are some of the main ones that we see. Another thing that would come up often is after the 2-year mark of policies is the most common time frame. Jessica, you were mentioning before about people being cut off at a certain period of time.
Yeah, because I think you were saying sometimes it's like, they can all of a sudden decide, I don't know, but I think particularly around mental illness, like you have a policy and they're like, well, your anxiety is, I can't remember how we talked about it last time, but this anxiety isn't covered by that policy, or this is something else now.
Yeah, so I mean, there's different ways it can come up. They might say, well, we feel like you're making improvement, so you must be able to return to work. And that's a reason for being cut off after having been paid for some period of time. And that's somewhat subjective, but insurance companies do that all the time. They say, well, you've been off for 6 months, you're taking antidepressants, you must be fine. I don't like to be glib about that, but that's a reality that we see. Another time period would be when we call the change of definition. So the change of definition under the policy from the own occupation to the any occupation part of the policy. And this is particularly relevant to individual policies. Something that you should be looking at when you're purchasing is to look at any own occupation coverage. Okay, so if you're a professional, let's say you're a doctor or any type of professional, but let's say you use the example of a doctor. So you could get a policy that covers you for your own occupation. So if you cannot work as a doctor, even your specific specialty, we had a case where the doctor was a dermatologist. He could not work as a dermatologist. He was going to get paid. He then wound up working as a consultant using his medical knowledge, but not actually working as a doctor. He was making income, but he was still paid by the insurance company because he had an own occupation policy. So that's actually particularly relevant to professionals or people who have a very specific occupation, and something you should be looking at when you're purchasing that individual disability.
That's really important to know. Yeah, really important. So yeah, there's like so many great questions here. So we had some great responses to your last video, and one question kept coming up was, how do you know what insurance provider to go with? Like there's so many out there. Are there more ones are more ethical or not? And how do you decide that?
Well, from our perspective, quite frankly, I think we've had claims against every insurance company.
That's very heartening.
Yay.
Oh, well,
So there
this
isn't
one
some magic
never-
company, right? Yeah.
you know, this one we've never had a claim against, so you should go with them.
Yeah.
That's not the case. There are certain insurers that represent a much larger percentage of the marketplace. So, you know, those are the ones that have the majority of policies. I would say when you're looking at purchasing insurance, you should go to an insurance agent that is impartial, not working for a particular company, an insurance company, but sells products from various different insurance companies so that you can then compare with that agent the different products, and not just like, okay, it's this insurance company or that insurance company, but what is the actual product that I'm purchasing and which is the best product for me. I would say that's the best advice I can give on that question.
That's brilliant. Well, that's perfect. I think we've covered, that gives them a lot of information to start with. And what I feel like the biggest takeaway from this is, and I'm so glad we're doing this series, is that do your homework. Like don't just go buy a policy. And, you know, because a lot of times too, I find, you know, the insurance policies are often, it's like 6 pages long and there's tons of information. You're like, oh, I'll just sign it. But, you know, what we're learning from this to me is like, do your homework, like take more time.
Absolutely. Is there anything you want to add, Sam, before we go?
Well, I mean, certainly, and then a good agent would help you with that. I mean, most policies are probably more than 6 pages, Jessica.
No, that sounds like a lot to me.
and, you know, it's all legalese. But, you know, a good agent who's looking at policies all the time will be able to say to you, okay, this is the important provisions, this is what it means, and advise you on that, because that's what they're looking at every single day.
Well, thank you.
Sorry, I just had one quick question because you said that. Is it worth it? Like, could you take your insurance policy to a lawyer? I know that's an extra expense, but you said it's legalese. Is it worth it? Because they're sort of out of the insurance thing. Could you get a policy and then do people ever do that, or is that overdoing it?
It's not something that we have done in the past. But it's certainly not a bad idea to get somebody who understands legal documents, whether that's a lawyer or an insurance agent, to review it in detail before you commit to purchasing that policy, just so that you understand exactly what it is that you're buying, for sure.
That's great. That's actually a great question, Jessica. Thank you. So thank you very much, Sam. We'll be back for part 3, where I think we're discussing group disability, which I know is different to individual. And if anyone has any questions, please put your questions below, and then we can send them off to Sam and she can respond to you in our next video.
Perfect. Thanks, Sam. See you next time.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.